Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 189. I hope you're doing well. I'm very excited to be sharing this episode with you today. I'm speaking with Maria Coryell-Martin. Maria is the founder of Art Toolkit. Now, Art Toolkit is a really unique art supply company that specialises in the tiniest, most versatile and portable watercolour palettes that you'll ever come across. The one I use now is half the size of a business card, and my other one I've been using for more than 10 years. It's an amazing piece of art kit. I actually came across Maria's website, expeditionaryart.com, way back before I knew that this kind of art was possible, and it inspired me so much back then. To have the chance to talk with Maria now feels like coming full circle in a really lovely way. Maria has had some of the most incredible experiences in remote places all across the world, which she talks about in this conversation, including going to the Arctic and the Antarctic regions. She's collaborated with scientists and used art to communicate scientific research to others, and she used her experience as an expeditionary artist to create this thriving art brand that's loved by people all around the globe. And the beauty of Maria's message is that this spirit of adventure that drives her is in all of us, and that we can have beautiful adventures by tuning into the wonders around us, wherever we are. Let's listen. Maria, thank you so much for being here with me. This is going to be so much fun.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here, Bethan, and really appreciate you inviting me. Thank you.
This is huge for me because you have been a really big part of my journey, in fact, and I'll tell that story a bit later when we get into it. But I always start my podcasts by looking back at someone's story and the things that planted the seeds in them, the things that influenced them on their journey. And there's a very clear line from what you do to your early start. I know your father was a scientist who studied sea ice, and I would love to hear you talk about that, the trajectory, the early start, and how that's influenced you.
Yeah, well, I think there's the delight we all feel as kids and the little sparks and passions we have. And when I think back to some of the little memories from my childhood, one was certainly my father and his research, where even in my childhood bedroom, it had the little slanted ceilings, and there used to be big maps of the Arctic up on the ceilings.
Oh, yeah.
And so I remember early in my childhood lying in bed and looking up at these maps. And then in the hall closet were these giant parkas. He would call them his super coats. And you could try on, and they'd, drag on the floor. And so that really, sparked my curiosity early. But I also think about just loving being outside and having a little sense of adventure and play. And for me, like, another early memory is just a fascination with the sky. And my parents still tease me because I would blame things on the clouds. They'd be like, Maria, who was drawing on the walls? And I'd say the clouds did it. And then in grade school, I came up with a little series of dreams for myself. And one of them was to paint sky and water well. I wanted to visit every continent, and I wanted to work on a children's book. So I haven't worked on a children's book yet. That may be something still to come in the future, but some of those little early dreams got peaked in my childhood.
Yeah. And then was it a natural progression to study art at uni? Did you know your path from the beginning?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was one of those kids, and it's fun now to have a child because my kiddo lives and breathes art sort of similarly to me. I always had a sketchbook with me, and it was just how I would express myself. I literally had one next to my bed. So, before bed at night, I would just doodle and journal or practice drawing. And And through my father's work, we were invited to travel some, in particular to Japan. And so one strong memory for me was when I was 9 years old, being in Japan. And of course, I had a sketchbook with me. And I'd meet lots of kids, and I knew a little bit of Japanese, but a lot of our time was spent drawing things out on a sketchbook together of like, how, what we did at a school day, how we got to school. We draw a bus or walk, little people walking. But just for me, so much of art represented a way to like connect with people and communicate and express myself. And so really early on, this idea of something that is been a foundation both in my work and Art Toolkit, our adventure art supply company, is that idea of art as a tool. And whether it's self-expression, communication, connection, scientific inquiry, observation, meditation. And so from a very young age, it was just part of how I interacted with the world. And in high school, we didn't have much of an art program. I took a little photography, but I would integrate art into everything I did. And I still have these journals from language arts classes.
Oh, cool.
Where I wish I could pull one out to show you. I had these cards. Maybe after our call, I'll dig one out of my cupboard for you. But for my language arts class, I would often incorporate all sorts of watercolor journals into my reports and storytelling. Like a little bound set of note cards with little cartoons talking about the myths, or it gave me a way to use my art in sort of non-traditional ways within school. And then when I got to college, I would just realize like I needed to take art classes to keep my sanity.
And then after graduation, you had this incredible opportunity, a fellowship that essentially you went out for a year to travel to develop this project. I'd love to hear you talk about your project, Ties to the Land, exploring remote regions through art, and this experience of this fellowship of going out into the world and what you saw.
Yeah, it was a real remarkable opportunity. And I feel extreme gratitude to my college, also Carleton College, because I was told of this fellowship called the Thomas J. Watson Fellowship when I was a sophomore, because I kept going to the dean's office and to my professors and saying, look, I really want to do this. Can I get some money for it? And they'd be like, okay, apply for this little grant, and I would. And I got some smaller fellowships and grants while in school. And it really taught me of just like one thing is just don't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Yeah.
And like you may not get it, but when you ask for what you want, you have to articulate your vision. And whether it's writing an application, if you don't get a response, you've still gone through all that legwork of dreaming up what you want to do. And whether or not, you succeed with funding from one department, you may still be able to do it in another way. And so my professors and my dean suggested I apply for this fellowship, and it basically the Watson funds dreams to 50 students from these 50 select colleges. I think this year they may just give out 40, but they gave us a chunk of money and said, leave the country. If you're a foreign student, you had to leave your home country too. They wanted you to stay out and follow your dream. And it was not supposed to be academically affiliated. So it was independent. And I really just wanted to go paint in remote regions. And I was also curious about how other artists, different landscapes were reflected in their work. And so I've always been curious about landscape and this emotional response we have to it. Of what makes some place feel like home. How do some people feel agoraphobic, just overwhelmed in a big space, where other people feel free. Some people feel claustrophobic in a forest versus just safe and nurtured. And so I wanted to push myself to these different sort of extreme landscapes and paint and explore my response and meet people. And it was a wonderful adventure. I think I traveled about 13 and a half months total.
Wow.
And I came home and I just didn't want to stop.
Where did you find yourself in those months?
I began with an extremely easy landscape where I wish I'd spent more time in French Polynesia.
Oh, yeah, wow.
And that was just stunning. And I learned there that I liked to have kind of an open-ended schedule, but a lot of families took me in. I met a lot of artists doing like wonderful traditions like the tattoo practices and, things based in fishing and learning about the history of the islands, and local archaeologists. People are just so generous with me, and got to go sail around with, a French guy for a couple weeks. And then I went over to Tibet with a stop in Japan to meet a brushmaker friend who, when I was 12, my family lived in Tokyo as well for 7 months. And I met this wonderful, just magical brushmaker who made a paintbrush out of my own hair.
That's amazing.
It was just this real model for expressing myself through art. And really, my mother and I would go sit and paint with him. So I had to stop and visit him in Tokyo. And then I spent some months in cultural Tibet, China and cultural Tibet. So traveled all across the Tibetan plateau. Yeah, really, real experience. And came from that and went to Mali, West Africa. So I'd studied French in college, so I was able to use that in French Polynesia and West Africa, and spent a lot of the time in the Sahel, which is in between, mostly in between Timbuktu and Bamako in Mali, with mostly a family of musicians, and to a wonderful festival in the desert. And
this must have been an incredible thing for a young woman, going out into the world alone, probably for the first time, just open up all these incredible experiences.
Yeah, it had some real highs, some real challenges, just being on my own. I kept a lot of little mantras close. I learned a lot of things like don't make decisions when tired. Never pass up a chance to sit down or go to the bathroom or fill up your water bottle.
Yeah.
Those were a couple little things I always kept in mind. And then I went up and spent some time in Greenland, about 3 or 4 months. And a friend of mine who inspired me to go there hosted me in Denmark for a week, so I could kind of find my groove. It was a big transition from the really hot desert to the really cold desert. Yeah. And in Greenland, just brought everything together for me. I had an artist in residency in a small town for 7 weeks, and various research teams really generously invited me to their sites and gave me the opportunity to learn about their research. And it was kind of hooked me on the polar regions.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated by this idea. And you've talked about landscape and the emotional response, but the similarities and differences between your experiences in desert and what we think of as desert, and then sort of the desert of the polar regions is an interesting connection. Did you make those? Did you think about those similarities and differences when you were out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with a desert, one thing that I really respect about them is what thrives there is just highly specialized. Because the environments are so harsh, they have these specialized ecosystems, which I think are really stunning, and they're also more fragile. They're more fragile to ecological impact, to climate change. And so I think they, we see sort of signs of climate change sort of first and came through, looking amplified. That's the word I'm looking for in some of these regions, at least some years ago, especially. And I find personally, as an individual who can have, a million ideas and gets really excited about a lot, I find some personal quiet in places with these big landscapes and big skies where I really enjoy that atmosphere. And I love painting skies and big spaces. And so on a personal level, I really enjoy being in these spaces and learning about them. Yeah.
And you've been to the Arctic. You've also been to the Antarctic. And I was thinking about your experiences in both of those places, because obviously down here in Australia, we kind of have a closeness our minds go to the Antarctic when we think of polar regions. And I'd love to hear you talk about the differences in those landscapes and, again, the similarities and the differences. Did it feel different being out there on the ice in those two opposite places?
Yeah, I had some remarkable experiences in the Antarctic regions as artists in residence on expedition tour ships.
Oh, wow.
And The first one was right after I'd come home from my big trip. I sort of immediately started looking for opportunities.
What next? Yeah.
And I managed to get myself onto this icebreaker going to Snow Hill Island, which is an emperor penguin colony.
Oh, wow.
And it was the first time this company had done this voyage there. And so we were on this massive icebreaker going through the ice and then taking helicopters near the colony and hiking in. And it was pretty wild to get to experience it. And I feel it's a double-edged sword, some of the the tourism in these places, just because of,
I agree.
The impact. I feel really fortunate to have had the opportunity to be there. But speaking to the landscape, Antarctica was just on this whole other scale. Just the scale and scope of the landscape just felt so big, of just the density of wildlife and the scale of the mountains and the ice and the icebergs, that was really awe-inspiring. And what I love, though, about the time I've spent in Greenland and some of the other Arctic regions is the culture, where you've got this rich cultural context of people who, have just horrific arts traditions and, have learned to thrive in these environments. So I find them really equally compelling places.
Oh, I'm fascinated by that too, about human adaptability and how humans can figure out way to live, survive, and thrive in really extreme places.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of a sign of, or something to learn from, of different types of resilience. And,
and you've done some pretty extreme things. Drawing from helicopters, narwhals, and sketching polar bears in the Arctic. These things are like off the scale in terms of dream things for artists. Tell me about that.
I feel really fortunate. And I mean, it's funny, Bethan, because the day-to-day of my life is not steeped in high adventure, but I've had some real peak experiences on some of my expeditions that I feel incredibly fortunate. And working with scientists, I've done more projects in the Arctic where I've contributed to outreach and education for a scientist. So working on storytelling, and we've put together exhibitions, multimedia presentations, websites, these educational materials. And I really love bringing art into a science context and science into an art context, to engage people and use art as a hook to learn about subjects that some people may not be as drawn into. I find, science, I always thought I'd be a scientist.
That was another path for you, potentially.
And for me, art became the dominant pathway. But the scientists I've worked with and I've met, I love sort of the specialization of learning so much, and just the passion behind the work and the effort that goes into collecting data and the tools. And so, getting to go up to the Arctic and think about what does it mean to study a narwhal, and just, wow, the scale of logistics is huge of what's just behind data. And I certainly love being in the field, and a ton of respect for the scientists I've worked with, and appreciation. And
it's such an interesting thing that art can be the thing that cracks open someone's interest or someone's ability to understand. And that's why art as a communication tool is so important. But first, when you're collaborating with scientists or a team of scientists, they have to first communicate to you what's important. And I'm really interested in that process. When you go out with a scientist or a scientific research team, how does the process begin that they start to say, this is what we want to communicate? How do they first communicate to you, and then you communicate through your art?
Yeah, I think it's unique to every project. And I want to come back to that, don't be afraid to ask for what you want. If someone says, okay, how can I work with a scientist? You might first think of what subject you're really interested in, and find, local researchers or a university, and go and have conversations with folks. So the people I've worked with, sort of the ideas come up of, hey, it'd be really neat to come along and paint
Yeah.
and learn more about your work. And then the conversation goes from there. But definitely anything I share is really worked or shared with the team and ensured that, hey, this is being portrayed accurately, represented accurately. Yeah. I think, just, I guess, a little background on my process. When I've gone into the field, I try to sketch as much as possible. I'm a big proponent of quantity. I love to just say, I'm going to sketch as much as possible. In calculating paper, I always look and think, okay, 3 to 5 sketches a day, whether they're really fast gestures or a bigger painting, then I'll definitely have enough paper. Running out of paper would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Because that will have meant that I had been super productive. I never run out of paper. I probably always bring too much. And then I love to do audio recordings, so some interviews, and help capture some of the story through the scientists' words. And I take photographs, and I do a little bit of mixed media. I'm not a videographer. It's not my specialty, but it's really fun to capture and use in presentations and bring in some of that atmosphere. So capturing some of the environmental atmosphere also. And then bringing that home. And I think, my studio paintings are free of any editing or editorial. This is just me and my creative side, but sort of the additional signage we put together and everything. It's really done collaboratively. I'd say collaboration and communication is just key.
And I guess you have to keep that skill going, or that line of communication with the scientists to say, this is what I've done. Does this feel right? And what else would you like? And what else can I say about this? And does it represent you? So that you have to get good at communication.
Yeah, and coming back to asking for what you want, a lot of projects we've put together proposals to share for possible funding. And some things I've done have been self-funded where we get sponsorships. Others we've had some foundations fund us. And but within those, it's not only the vision, it's finding some partners who say, hey, yep, we've reviewed this, and if if this is successful, yes, we'd like to work together. Yes, we'd like to host a show. Yes, we'd like to host a presentation. So it's really doing sort of as much groundwork in advance, which can feel kind of funny, but then you have a really clear list of what are our deliverables, what are we putting together? I find that within constraints, there's a lot of freedom. When you define constraints of a project, then you have these boundaries to it. And I feel this even with any painting or a series of paintings I'm working on, whether I say, okay, I'm going to work in a similar format or a similar scale, then I'm not making all the decisions all the time for every piece. And so, a big project like this is the same way of coming up with vision. What do we want to make? How are we going to do it? Who are we going to work with? And then you go do the work and have as much fun as you can.
Stuff.
And you come home and the real work begins. And all that.
Looking at your Expeditionary art website, it strikes me that you're an expert at painting white details on a white landscape. And I wonder about the challenges of that, because painting something in white, in a nature journaling context, painting a white flower or whatever it might be is a challenge. How did you teach yourself to capture white? Because white isn't white. It's a myriad of different colors. Tell me about that.
Gray and blue and purple. So in high school and then in college, I spent 2 wonderful summers on the Juneau ice field, which is an ice field between Alaska and Canada. And it was with this program called the Juneau Ice Field Research Program. And I fell in love with just, again, this idea of how we react to landscapes, how we can learn about a subject from these different perspectives. As an artist, I was doing a lot of sketching. As from a practical sort of ski mountaineering perspective, how to navigate safely, crevasse rescue, how do we just exist in this landscape? And then from the scientific perspective of why are crevasses forming the way they are? What's the health of this glacier? And I came away from that, and in college, part of my senior project was doing a number of paintings from the ice field.
Wow.
And I started out, Beth, and I wanted to make like a big painting of a whiteout. So I got this great big canvas, and I was oil painting at the time too. And I thought, I'm going to paint this beautiful, huge, oil painting.
Yeah.
And it turned into a giant gray canvas. It was horrible. So then I started painting much more minimalist, smaller watercolors of just trying to distill light and shadow, and really leaving negative space. And I think some of it was influenced from some of my time in Japan also, and practicing sort of sumi painting, where there's just this beautiful use of white space and more minimal, just a little more minimalist, and a sense of quiet. And I really feel that in some of these regions. And that really kicked off some of my ice paintings. I could look into finding a few of the older ones and send them to you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. And when I look at your paintings, I feel that. I feel that sense of quiet and just expansiveness. And it's quite a lovely feeling to look at that. And I haven't been to the polar regions, but I can feel what it might feel like when I look at your pieces.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm hoping to do some more studio painting. I've been a bit wrapped up lately in Art Toolkit projects and family, and but the studio painting. And I think coming back to the early experience, watercolor for me was much more evocative of what I was looking for than oils, and how I was handling oils. And but
I'm interested in your actual process, like out on the ice, because it must be, it's an extreme landscape, but I wonder if you experienced like the emotional and physical tests of being in an extreme environment and how you dealt with that, and then how that informed your choice of materials, because what's portable, what's doable out there, you can't get out tubes of oil paint. So I'm interested in, first maybe you can answer about the extremes and the tests, the physical tests, and then how that informed your choice of materials.
Yeah, well, to be fair, in most landscapes, there's usually either a warm tent or sometimes a cabin or sometimes a little house or a boat, where we can go back at the end of the day and get cozy, right? So I need to... so I try not to suffer too much here.
Good.
And can have a little thermos of cocoa or hot tea. But it certainly has informed the way I work. I tend to be a very fast sketcher to try and capture a lot very quickly. And I love, watercolor is just so portable, lightweight, and in terms of an impact on a landscape, you can do so much with so little. I just love opening a palette and just the sense of possibility of all the colors and what you can do even with a simple water brush. And I also really enjoy when I sketch working on toned paper. So like a gray or a brown, or if I'm in the polar region, sometimes like a dark blue. There's one that I've used for years called Canson Mitiente or Mitins. It's like a pastel paper. And I love it because it gives that middle value.
Yes.
And so when I paint and sketch on it, can add white gouache or mix white gouache with paints and bring, the values, the bright values, light values, and then add the darks. And so I find that can help work quickly. Sometimes I use a shorthand, like I'll just do a sketch and then take photos and do some color studies so then I can come back under shelter and paint more.
Yeah.
I learned very early on, Bethan, not to just use S because I came from one painting and I said, okay, I wrote S all over this painting, in this little sketch. And is it sun, shadow, or snow? And I was like, no, this is a problem.
You need to think about your future self, and are you going to understand your own shorthand?
Be specific. Yeah. But having a little shorthand can help, and like, okay, here I've got my cerulean blue to ultramarine blue and just little notes. And I think that's something I love with art is just the practice of attention, of the more we kind of actively practice noticing things around us, I think it just heightens our overall observations and experience of the world.
I've heard you use the term active observation, and I think that that's a really lovely term to describe what it is. And nature journalists and listeners to this podcast will know exactly that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's just present moment awareness and just consciousness. It's like being conscious of what we're seeing rather than just letting it go by as something that we don't touch.
Yeah, sort of passive onlookers is what I often think about. Mm-hmm.
And I've also heard you describe or talk about developing a sense of place and a palette of place. And I wonder how you come to know a place when you get there. How do you begin to develop that understanding through art and through active observation to get to know a place and build up this, what you call, palette of place? I love that term.
Yeah. Well, I think it's different for everyone. You know, everyone's experience is different. And that's something I love about a sketchbook is it's a record of your experience, the world through your eyes. And it's this filter, and it's by hand. And from some of the earliest sketchbooks I saw as inspiration, including wonderful pages from Thomas Moran, who was helped create paintings to inspire the creation of the American National Park System. Okay, and he would go to places like Yellowstone or Yosemite and make these sketches first and these massive oil paintings. But I felt looking at his sketches was like looking over his shoulder and, you know, seeing the world through someone's eyes.
Personal.
Yeah, so that's to say my palette of place might be different than yours. You're probably noticing different things than me. But I think for a start, I love trying to get to know the colors because like a desert palette might be so different from, you know, say the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia or my home Salish Sea with, you know, the sea and the Pacific Northwest, evergreen trees. And so I love just playing with color mixing and trying to say, okay, what am I noticing? And that's such a great question in all of just what am I noticing?
Yes.
And I love getting to know the pigments of, you know, granulation for rocks or, you know, what grays can I mix and just keeping lots of notes. So I'll often just make pages with little swatches and notes and kind of journal to myself that question. And then, you know, a palette of place, I think about not only color, but then climate and experiences. And so from the nature journaling standpoint, you know, I might be noticing the temperatures or the wind and any of that other sort of those little data points. Yeah. And if I'm working with people, can I go and learn their stories and see the landscape through their eyes or meet locals and just kind of gathering stories from different perspectives. And I think about kind of orienting myself, finding my footing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of the nature journal as a travel sketchbook as well, because not only are you noticing what you see in nature, but you're also bringing in the cultural elements. And here I am, and these are the buildings, and these are the stones that the houses are made from, and this is the food that the people eat, and this is what people do. I think that's a powerful thing as well.
Yeah, and an open sketchbook is just such an invitation to connect. And anyone who's sat outside sketching knows that you've got to be comfortable with some people coming up and wanting to talk with you.
What do you do in that situation? Do you just invite them to have a look and have a chat?
Absolutely. I mean, especially traveling alone and you know, early on in my travels, it was just, I never knew what might happen. I might get invited to dinner I had the freedom of time to go follow those threads. And, you know, I think as a traveler or someone visiting, that sharing is part of any experience of being in another culture and being willing to share and have that flood both ways of meeting folks. So I just love it. And, you know, kids, it's always nice to have a couple little extra supplies that you're happy to give away.
I love that idea. Yeah, that's amazing. So going back just to touch on before we let this story travel into its next iteration, I'd love to hear you talk about, because polar regions have been such a big part of this, and particularly the Arctic, and we touched on how the effects of climate change are sort of amplified or more obvious in these regions. And I know you've done some work communicating the science around climate change, and I wonder if you could describe that work and what you've been seeing and what you've been able to communicate, and who can you present this to, and what impact is happening around this climate change and the changes in the Arctic?
Yeah, I mean, so many people are doing so many projects, and I'm one little drop in, I think, just this effort of a huge community. But one of the last larger projects I worked on was a field project in 2019, and then we had an exhibition 2021 or 2022. So I went up to the Arctic with an ornithologist named George DeVokie, and George lives in Seattle, and we have a mutual friend who is an educator named Katie Morrison. And Katie and I are friends from me having gone to a school she worked at. And we were walking along to a little kids' nature journaling program in the park one day and said, "Ooh, wouldn't it be fun to go into Alaska together and paint?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's see what
make
we
this
can put together." Yeah, let's talk to George. And what's remarkable about George is he's got the longest running consecutive years of field research at a site. Nearly 50 consecutive years every summer, going on up to this island on the north slope of Alaska, studying a bird called a guillemot, a black guillemot. And on this island, he's got this story spanning almost 50 years now of this population of birds and the impact of warming temperatures on the colony. And then he's also got this layer of personal experience of this one man who's lived every summer basically on this island, experiencing changes such as the open water, where he's now, has to bring in barrels of water versus just getting to melt snow.
Oh, wow.
Building a cabin because hungry polar bears are coming to the island and he needs to protect himself from polar bears. The birds having to fly farther for food, and looking at different shifting, ocean temperatures. And so that was a really compelling project, and with the different layers of experience from the scientific and the human, and sort of the atmospheric as well. And and one thing I did was for the project, I think I went on the 46th year, I created sort of a little a set of watercolor cards, one per year, that represented his summer.
Oh, wow.
And so on each card had a temperature. So I had colors representing temperatures. So it was like the average temperature at the same date every year, and it ranged from blue to red. So I had the scale. So they're like kind of like Polaroid size. And then on the cards, I represented the number of eggs laid for the guillemots, and then the number hatched.
Oh, wow.
So you could see some of the viability of the colony per year. And then each card also had a little icon showing some little stories of the year. So one might be the year the cabin happened. One might be the year that a fox came and decimated the colony. And so put together, we had this really lovely grid, and installed it as part of a museum exhibition we had. And that was a really fun project for me, because it wasn't just trying to show some of the beauty, which I also did a number of paintings, but got to play more with the data
Visual
and thinking about,
data.
can we represent the data in a fun, different visual way to help tell a story.
That's super powerful. And maybe again, like we said before, like an entry point for someone who doesn't necessarily see, like with climate change, it's interesting because it's kind of abstract for a lot of people, especially if you haven't had changes in weather or changes in temperature, or sort of direct experience with the extreme impacts. But to be able to then visualize it and say, oh, this person's actually tracking changes over such a span of time, and this visual representation could be a way for someone to dive into that reality.
Yeah, and George is also a fantastic storyteller.
Yeah.
So lots to learn from him.
I love that thread of storytelling in all of this, because storytelling is such a human experience. It's the way that we have always been, and it's such an important part of the way we communicate. And doing that through art is exceptionally powerful. And
it harkens back to nature journaling for me, with something a teacher friend of mine said. She said, a picture, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but it helps to write down some of those words.
Yes, actually, this connection between words and pictures is powerful. And tell me about that, the way you layer words and pictures in your journal and your work.
Yeah, well, when I'm in the field sketching, just everything pretty much has notes, or I often keep sort of little silly, semi-cartoonish little sketchbooks, similar to what I probably did growing up, of helping talk about my day and talk about the stuff I'm learning. And then in working on exhibitions, I think like every painting or everything I do has a story. So we'll often do some posters that can be installed, helping share some bigger stories. And then every painting will have at least a caption, usually a little more lengthy. Trying to go a little deeper into, not just, hey, this is the title, but here's a little story that goes along with it and gives some more context.
And your business, Art Toolkit, came out of some experiments that you did for the best way to carry your travel palette, best sort of iteration of your own field kit. And I love that idea that you're out there and you're experiencing it and, this isn't working, it's too bulky or it's too messy or whatever it is. Can you talk about that experience of trying to perfect your own toolkit, your own field kit, and how that grew into Art Toolkit as a business?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, it's just fun, right? I think everyone knows the feeling before a trip when you're just like, wow,
what to take?
What am I going to take? And like, it starts to pile up and you're like, okay, going to pare down. But trying to come up with something that'll make it easy when you're out. Because if you're traveling, things get heavy or just, there's a lot of gear to manage. And I love making my own things or tinkering, it's fun to tinker. And, so before every trip, trying to think about, what's going to help keep my tools secure so they're not going to blow away, whether rubber bands, Velcro tape is awfully useful, little clips, what's going to help me sketch standing up and be comfortable, or what can I use if I'm going to be sitting down, to be protected from the elements. And, Art Toolkit came largely in part from this trip I did to Greenland, in 2011, to work with a walrus biologist. So we were on a little island on the northeast coast of Greenland. You're going to laugh at me, Beth, and I always have to go, never eat shredded wheat
I
around
do the
same. Compass. And like, you think I'm like 43 years old, you think I would know my east and west, and I have to go around the compass. So that's northeast Greenland. So up in northeast Greenland, and we were on this little tiny island, and it was just an incredibly fun project. The scientist was introduced to me through a friend of mine, and he was from Denmark and had a Swedish team member and another one from Norway, and I got to be up there sort of with some extra hands and there to paint. And so we got to go sneak up on these walruses and spend a lot of time observing them, on also some Arctic terns. And watch out for polar bears. We did have a polar bear visit and sort of another encounter. That's another story. But sneaking up on walruses in particular, we wore these all-in-one suits, like a machinist suit over our puffy jackets, so that we could crawl around in the sand to sneak up on walruses, commando kind of crawl. And so we wouldn't scare them. And we'd be downwind. And then I'd try and be pulling out my sketchbook and pulling out my camera, pulling out my audio recorder. And I found that having my palette outside my sketchbook was really annoying, because like I wanted to keep them all together. And with a machinist suit, you didn't want your stuff kind of falling down your suit. And so I came home from that trip feeling really inspired to make a really slim watercolor palette that would fit inside my zip cover. I was already using sort of these zip covers for my kit. And that's when I started tinkering around with the first little pocket palettes. And I think a year later, I launched the little Art Toolkit version on my website. You can still see it on my blog. And I just thought, it's just the delight of art is just, some things are just better shared. And I think the experience of sharing tools and sharing art and being, having some community experiences is just so special. And I loved that the Art Toolkit, from a project since the beginning, was a chance for me not to just make my own art, but want to help just inspire and empower others to go find joy in their world.
Yeah, and having such a portable kit, you can literally put it in your pocket. You can go out and have your kit with you wherever you are. And I mentioned it at the beginning, but I want to tell you about it because your website, the Expeditionary art website, so my son's dad shared that website with me maybe 2014, and I was absolutely blown away. It was before I sort of had a label or a language around nature journaling, but I was keeping a sketchbook at home, just little things in my backyard. And then he shared this website with me, and I was absolutely blown away that this is something you can do. You can go out and you can pair art and science and communication and these experiences of the landscape. And I was completely blown away by your website, and we purchased a pocket palette back then. So I shared a photo with you from me on a mountain in Tasmania, 2015, and that was my first pocket palette, and I was just so in love with it, and that idea that you can just put it in your pocket and take it wherever you want to. So this was actually even before. I mean, I had been nature journaling in my uni studies 10 years before that, but I didn't have a name or a label for this. And so your work and your website was really the start of my experience of all this, of realizing that you can do that. Not only that can you do it, but that there are people out there doing it, and that it can turn into a community. So yeah, this feels really exciting to be here with you, to tell you that and to share these stories with you.
Makes me so happy, Bethany. I just wish we'd gotten to go on a little painting adventure together.
Well,
maybe we still can someday. There's lots of time.
Yeah. I think we will. When the time is right, I can see myself coming over there and knocking on the door of Art Toolkit and going out and doing.
Yeah, you've got a pretty early pocket palette then from some early iterations.
You told me that it was probably filled by you, right?
I was just making these, and we had our kiddo in 2015. So by that time, Art Toolkit was a little side project where I'd make the palettes and assemble the kits and ship them to folks. And I have some early blog posts on my old website of Expeditionary Art website of people in the field using it, and I get such a kick out of that.
Yeah, it must have been amazing to see, this tool works for me. Would anyone like to share in it? And then to see it expand into what it has, because so many people are using Art Toolkits and pocket palettes now.
Well, I'm truly honored they are, and it's hard for me to believe it's come this far. It truly. I think it's fun when you just keep at something and see where it takes you. And it's just speaking back to community that's just made it. The special sauce is just the creative community and all the ways that we can uplift and inspire each other.
And you do that so beautifully because So Art Toolkit is not only the art supplies, but it is also a community, and you work really hard to bring together artists and ambassadors and people who love color and love watercolor, and the collaborations that you put out in the world are very beautiful, and you have people creating custom palettes for their regions or for a moment in time. Tell me about these collaborations that are building the Art Toolkit community.
Oh, there's so many. And I first off just have to acknowledge now just the amazing team of people we have, because it is no longer just me. Yeah. And early on, my first employee was my mother-in-law to help me ship, because I realized it was just getting too much for me in my back. I bent down one day to open up my folding table. Yeah. And I had a 2-year-old at the time, and my back was just seized up. And I went, oh my gosh,
I need help.
This is too much. I need help. And so about a year later, we incorporated Art Toolkit and began slowly untangling it from Expeditionary Art, because it had all been hosted on my website.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And it had started out all me and my
Yeah.
amazing husband, who Darren Reed is background as an outdoor educator and web developer, and we've been friends since high school. We're truly partners and best friends, and I love him. But so once we incorporated, there's been this untangling of Expeditionary Art and Art Toolkit, where Art Toolkit is, very much its business now, founded, and by me and all of my passions. But our team of creative folks in Port Townsend are just incredible and have helped make these collaborations possible, from hosting workshops with instructors from around the world, demos such as the wonderful demo we had with you.
Yes, I was so honored to be able to do that. It was so much fun.
And we love featuring other artists' work for our newsletter and socials. And I think it's just so fun to see the different ways that people explore their world, coming back to the different perspectives and so many ways of being an artist or integrating art into our practice. Whether, more abstract or ink or watercolor, and but we really have an emphasis on the travel and the portable, mostly portable, making it easy to keep your supplies with you. And easy to use. And we've done some collaborations with wonderful companies like Travelers Company USA that makes these fabulous travelers notebooks. And they've done fun custom palettes for their company. And last year we were featured on a visit. They did what's called a road trip tour. So they stopped at multiple cities in the US. And when they came to Port Townsend, we had these people who had some were from, states away, who'd come, and they came to our little town, and they painted, and they all visited our shop, and we had their company representatives from Japan visiting. And I have to pinch myself sometimes at all these people with this foundation of just creativity, and everyone's so friendly.
So that now there's a brick and mortar store that you can go into as well.
There is, our last move, we had a little shop space after we moved out of my house. Right now, you have my camera on, so you can see my little studio.
Yes.
I used to assemble the art toolkits in my laundry room, and then
that
I had
is
some
amazing.
people help. And then my mother-in-law expanded the business to her spare bedroom, and then we rented a little tiny, not so tiny, but a beautiful little space that we outgrew. And when we outgrew, we moved to downtown Port Townsend. We thought, we're downtown, we better open a retail space.
Yeah.
And actually, Bethan, just now we are in the midst of fixing up a warehouse.
Oh, wow.
So we've rented just a gorgeous warehouse space about a mile from my house, and we'll move all our back-end operations to this big warehouse, which will give us more room downtown. And stay tuned to what we do. We're hoping we'll expand. I'm hoping we can do more in-person and community events, and we'll see what we all have bandwidth for, but I'm really excited about it. It feels like another iteration of how we can be in the world.
Yeah. And you mentioned it before about, that you have in your history these exceptional experiences, and that day-to-day life is different from that. And when we first got on the call, I said, Maria, you look cold. And you said, yeah, I just went for a dip in the sea. And and I would love for you to explore with me that idea of little home adventures that we can all have, because sketching polar bears in the Arctic, it isn't going to be part of the life experience of everyone, but we can all find adventures where we are. And I would love for you to describe the way that we can find wonder and these moments of adventure in our day-to-day lives.
Oh, I think that is just such a great question, Bethan, and something I feel really passionate about because, particularly since growing this business and the pandemic, my life is more insular. And I don't get out on more far-flung adventures quite so often. I did have a wonderful residency in Norway a couple of years ago, and still, I'm always keeping my eyes open. Yeah. But every day, I love to find ways to be in the world, and I love the idea of micro adventures. These little things we can do. For me, I love being active, and so I bike pretty much everywhere. I'm hardly ever in a car in our little town. Yeah. And that lets me be in the world, to just feel the fresh air and, ride over the hill and look out over the sky, the bay, and have the big sky and the sparkling sea. I love open water swimming to push myself out of my comfort zone. Just all of a sudden I can be in the water, and there's this whole other world beneath there of, crabs and the schools of fish or sea stars.
That's amazing. This whole world going on under there that we're not privy to unless we get down in the water.
Yeah. And, today was a short swim without my wetsuit. So, I was in the water 6 minutes, but it gave me these 6 minutes of just feeling things really vividly and noticing and being outside of my head and in a really wonderful way. And I look for little moments like that every day of, whether it's a walk in the forest and remembering to look up at the trees. And I think that a nature journal and sometimes giving yourself little projects can give you the same experience, because I think it comes back to that practice of attention. Because I think part of it is taking ourselves out of the to-do lists and the running transactions in our head of, I'm going to do this and this and this and move to this. But to give ourselves something where we just step out, and maybe it's setting a timer for 10 minutes. Maybe it's having a project of, doing a little set of thumbnail sketches and just looking at the sky and noticing the colors. But I think that adventures don't have to be big, don't have to be far-flung, don't have to be physically uncomfortable, but it's a chance to have a little bit of a reset in some way to push yourself out of just your normal comfort zone and that sort of daily run of life that we all experience.
Yeah, I think it's important, and it's doable. We just have to make the choice to do it.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to take long.
Yeah, that's it. And I've heard you speak about timers before, and I think that's a very lovely way to just make it kind of snack size. Art.
Oh, I love a timer. Yeah. 15, you can do so much in 15 minutes. Whenever I don't want to start something, I might even start with 5 minutes. I'm going to do this for 5 minutes to kind of get that flow started.
Yeah. And you talked about your experiences with your parents and sketching in Japan with your mother. And you also touched on that your child has a love of this. And I would love to finish by talking about that family connection and what they experience, what they love to draw, and that experience of drawing side by side with your child.
Oh, it's simply my favorite thing, Bethan. And I mean, our family, we like to go places, preferably with, some exercise, and then hang out and sketch.
Yeah.
And most recently, last week, my kiddo and I did a 5-night bicycle tour. We have a tandem bicycle, and it was our first tandem bicycle tour. I can send you a little picture.
Yes,
it was
please.
Delightful. And so we went out together, and we each had our sketch kits and our sketchbooks, and we each filled this zigzag book, each our own book.
Yeah.
And so we'd go out and sketch together. So we'd make dinner at the campsite, and then we'd go out and we sketch sunset together. These are memories that they're going to have forever, like formative things that you don't forget. That's a beautiful, beautiful experience to do together. I hope so. And my first grade teacher always said that a creative person is never bored, or you could also think never boring.
Yes.
And so we just always have art supplies, and we always have more to share, because again, you never know, and especially being a parent, often there's other folks who come up and need to make a little art too.
This is beautiful.
But I honestly, they blow me away.
Yeah.
Their art is beyond where I was at their age. And
this is so exciting. I want to direct people to the best place to find you. Can you tell me where people can find you online?
Yeah, well, if you'd like to see and learn more about my expeditionary art projects, my website is expeditionaryart.com. I'm a little less active there these days because I'm highly involved with Art Toolkit, which is arttoolkit.com. And Art Toolkit's very active on social media, just at Art Toolkit, especially Instagram. And I've got a terrific marketing team, and they help put together just the most marvelous little stories and videos.
Do you know, when I look at your social media and your website, in fact, everything that you do, it's just color. It's like this sparkling wave of color comes at you, which I just adore because I adore color too. But that's my overall impression is just color.
Oh, we had fun yesterday. We worked on a little photo shoot at a park where
Yeah.
I spent the whole time sketching a panorama of flowers. And
So good.
I thought, I feel pretty lucky.
Yeah, it has been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking this time to chat about all these things that you're passionate about.
Oh, well, such a pleasure, Bethan. I want to say thank you for having me. And Bethan, I also wanted to say we'd be more than happy to make a special code to share with
fantastic.
your followers that could be available for like a month after your podcast.
Beautiful. Thank you. That's so generous. I'll put that in the show notes of this podcast and we can direct
Perfect.
people to the Art Toolkit
Yeah.
website.
But yeah, Bethan, honestly, it's been a real pleasure to connect, and I'm so touched that my art helped inspire
Yes,
your practice.
the beginnings.
And I think what you're doing and helping inspire community and nature journaling and folks to get out is just so beautiful, and appreciate being here and look forward to following everything that you do.
Thank you, Maria. I look forward to sketching together in real life one day when the time is right.
Yeah, and lots more online in the midst.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're so welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Maria. I loved everything about this chat, and it's hard to distill it down and say what I appreciated the most. Maria has had such incredible experiences, and I loved hearing about her time in the polar regions. I think especially I just love the idea of these micro adventures that we can have and how we can deliberately tune into that sense wherever we are. If it's in our backyards or in our local neighborhoods, we can do that too. And I really loved hearing about how much of a family thing this is, with Maria having been inspired by the work of her father in the polar regions and now making art and adventure as part of her life with her own child. This is super inspiring. So it's very likely that you already know about Art Toolkit, and you might even be using a pocket palette yourself. But if you head over to the show notes, you'll find a discount code that you can use on the Art Toolkit website up until July 31st, 2025. So this is for the next 2.5 months from the release date of this episode. And you can go there and find yourself some art supplied treasures. As well as my pocket palette, I also use a couple of different travel brushes that I got from Art Toolkit, and I've used and loved their little zigzag concertina sketchbooks that you'll find on the website too. So grab the discount code and follow the links and see what you can find on the website. In the show notes, you can also find a link to expeditionaryart.com where you can see Maria's artwork from all of her adventures. Thanks so much for listening. See you next week.